Hey cats and kittens, Mojo here. I'm going to show you how to install a true bypass switch into your original Crybaby wah. Got this switch on eBay for less than $5. The whole process takes about 15-20 minutes. And what it's going to do is keep your wah from sucking your guitar tone while it's off. Alright, let's break it down. Let's go over the connections that we're going to move from the old switch, which you see on top, to the new switch, which you see here on the bottom. First is the green input wire. Next is the purple output wire. Then the effects loop, which there's only one connection on the old switch, that's the blue wire. First thing we're going to do is add a bypass loop on the bottom corners. Then we're going to add the input on the left middle, the output on the right middle, and then for the effects loop we're going to move it to the upper right corner, and then we're going to add a new wire from the upper left corner to complete the loop, and that's going to go to the capacitor, which is at the input tip on the board. Let's get started. First, we're going to take the feet off the bottom. You can use a screwdriver if you need to. Mine were just finger tight, so unscrewing the feet took the screws with them. And then once you get it all off, you'll see how simple this is inside. Basically, it's just it's a battery and a simple board with an input-output, and then a tone pot, which has, of course, the genius part, the gear mechanism, which allows you to move it up and down with your foot. Now here's a bonus tip. If you loosen that screw holding that white piece of plastic there, you can gently pull back the lever and adjust the pot with your finger, which will change the pitch and throw of your wah. You can get different voicings this way. A lot of people do this. Alright, back to the action. Here's the switch we're going to replace. Alright, first things first, I'm going to cut a wire for the loop, actually two. Then I'm going to crimp the ends and tin them. First I tin my soldering iron. That's always the first thing you want to do. Then I like to tin the ends of the wire, which will keep the wires from fraying and also make it easier to connect. Remember, you heat the wire first and let the solder flow to the wire rather than try to put hot solder on a cold connection. Here's a switch. I'm going to stick the ends of the wire into little holes to help hold them there while I solder them on. And a little soldering action. Yes, it does take a bit of practice to do this all with just two hands. And there you have the loop. Now that that's done, our next step is to go ahead and remove the original switch, the stock switch that's in there. I have a little crescent wrench or adjustable wrench that I like to use for this purpose, so I can reach in there. And there's a few washers too, but there's just the one little nut. You want to set that aside. Here you'll notice that I'm using a towel to do all this work on. It keeps all these little round things from rolling off onto the floor. You'll find that useful later on. Now I'm going to cut the wires, and yes, I realize I could have unsoldered these, but when I have enough wire, what I like to do is create a new lead and use fresh solder rather than trying to reuse the solder that's there. You don't have to. I like to, but I did reuse the solder on the effects loop wires because there was two of them and they were already connected, and I just wanted to go ahead and keep them that way without messing around with them too much. Now we're going to strip the ends of the wire, and then we're going to tin the ends of the wire and get ready to install the new switch. So here's the new switch. We're going to orient it so the green bypass loop is on the bottom. We're going to put the green input on the left middle and the purple output on the right middle. The upper right will be the blue effects loop, and then the new green wire, which we'll install in a little bit. Setting the switch in place a little bit allows you to use both hands, and at this point I do want to go ahead and install the switch so I can move on to phase 2. Here we're comparing the lengths of the shaft so that we can make sure that when you step on it, it actually clicks down. I had to adjust the nut to make sure that it was the right length. Here we're putting the switch in place. I'm holding it in place with my thumb so that it doesn't turn, and putting on the washer, and then putting on the nut and finger tightening it before I start to really tighten it with the crescent wrench, and that's when you really want to be making sure that you're not letting it spin in place and putting strain on those wires. when you start to crank on it with the wrench to get it fully tightened. Now that the switch is in place, we're going to make some minor modifications to the board. So we take it off by using a 7/16 socket on both input and output jacks. Once those are off, there is a single screw holding the board down. You want to take that off and set it aside. Now here's where we make a really minor modification to the board to get this to be true bypass. There's a yellow capacitor here that leads from the input tip into the effects circuit, and we need to break that connection and wire the board directly to the bypass switch that we just installed. The way we do that is by scraping away the trace on the printed circuit board between the lower left input jack dot and the solder dot there at the beginning of the capacitor. And when it's done, it looks like this. You can use any sharp tool. I'm going to go ahead and use my wire cutters. They have a very sharp tip. And I just scrape that away very carefully not to interrupt the other traces, and it just takes a minute or so. Now that we've broken the connection, to remake the connection, we're going to make another wire here to go to that upper left corner of the switch, and we're going to strip it, and then we're going to tin it, and then we're going to connect it directly to that upper left corner switch pole. The next thing I'm going to do is unsolder that one end of the capacitor and pull it out halfway from the board so that I can solder that wire directly to it. You'll notice I'm using a little hemostat, and this is also called a forceps. You can get these online. They're very handy for this kind of electronics work. You can get in little places that you can't get to with a needle nose plier. Now I'm going to bend that capacitor just a little bit so that I can have more lead for my wire, and then I'm going to solder it up and test it out. Here you can see the green wire clearly connecting the switch to our input loop. I'm going to put this board back on after I put the battery cable underneath it. First we put the screw back, then we put the nuts back on the sides, finger tighten first, and then we tighten it snugly with our 7/16 socket wrench. Good to go. So just making sure all the connections are tight before I put the bottom on. Then I put the bottom plate on and get ready to finger tighten all of the feet back in place. I'm going to do one final check before we get ready to take it for a test ride. Thanks for watching. Head to mojosarmy.com for music, videos, and more.